All right, you guys, we have made it all the way to Module 12, and I am proud of you. So this module, we got some stuff to go over, and I just want to really drive it all home. So there's still a lot of great information and info for you in the bonus modules. If you haven't watched those yet, make sure you do, because I got a lot of good stuff for you in that. So we're going to hop right in and just get started here. All right, so making the repair, the nuts and bolts. All right, so we are all done diagnosing. The job has been sold. It's time to get to work. Make the repair and let's make some money. Okay, so whether you're replacing brake pads or replacing an engine, just follow these guidelines to finish the job quickly and correctly. So we're going to talk about finding your groove. Okay, so different technicians, they use different strategies to go about making repairs. Two different technicians can do the same repair totally different, and that's okay. So there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can go ahead and look up the procedure in your shop's information system like Identifix, Mitchell, and follow their step-by-step process on how to do the repair. Or you can kind of freestyle it, and you can decide yourself what's the smartest and quickest way to perform the repair. So I personally like to kind of figure it out myself and decide how I'm going to do it. But I do from time to time use the procedure, the vehicle procedure to show me, what components need to be taken apart. So anyways, here's kind of what I do. If there's a part of the vehicle that has to be removed or replaced, before I dig in, I take a couple minutes, just stand there and look at it and think to myself about the different ways to accomplish that. So I'm going to think to myself, what is the quickest and easiest way to get this done? Get a game plan going before I start going wild. So here's an example for you. Okay, say I'm trying to replace a hard to reach starter on a Toyota Tundra. Now I can see it can either come out one of two ways, towards the front of the engine or towards the rear of the engine. Okay, so the procedure says to remove the alternator and bring it out the front. On this particular vehicle, the exhaust looks pretty clean and it looks like it'll come apart without breaking the bolts. So I decide on this vehicle, it would actually be quicker to separate the exhaust than to remove the serpentine belt and alternator, because those are really hard to get to on those vehicles. So I decided to just pull the exhaust. Now I can get the starter out the back. Another example. Okay, so I'm replacing a blend door actuator on a newer Dodge Ram pickup. Remember, the blend door is for the heating, ventilation, and cooling system. Okay, so the procedure says to remove the entire dash to gain access. Huge job. So I locate the actuator, I look at it, and I see that I can actually get to two of the three screws without removing the dash. However, the third screw is impossible to reach with the dash in. However, the section of the dash that is covering it is behind the ashtray. So I decided that I could drill a hole in the plastic behind the ashtray where probably nobody will ever see it and gain access to the last screw. Guess what? I just saved about 7 to 8 hours from following the procedure. Huge time saver. That's a true story. Okay, another thing, guys, is just remember to use all your resources to save time. Yeah, even YouTube. Of course, be careful what you see on YouTube, but you know what? If nothing else, what I like to do is if I've done a job I haven't done before, see if there's a YouTube video on it and just quickly watch it to see what components they take apart, where that part's located, how it comes apart, and how it goes back together. It will save you time because you don't have to figure it out. You already kind of saw how it comes apart. Okay, now this is funny, but in this job, we love cheaters. I love when my guys cheat when it comes to replacing parts. So Book Time says it takes 3 hours to replace this part. They figure out a way to cheat, get it done in 2 hours. We love it. We love cheaters. Also, remember the old phrase, work smarter, not harder, right? It makes sense. Work smarter, not harder. Okay, so let's talk about bolts and fasteners. So bolts are going to be measured by length, diameter, and thread pitch, and hardness of the bolt. That's how they measure bolts. There's going to be standard and metric bolt sizes. There's also standard and metric thread pitches. Washers are almost always used between the bolt and the surface of the object being tightened. Loctite. This is something I guarantee you guys are going to use. Loctite or thread locker helps to create resistance so that if you have a bolt where the nut starts to loosen up on it or the fastener starts to loosen up, it's not just going to rattle out and fall out. It actually takes resistance to crank that thing out. So we always use these. We always use Loctite on torque converter bolts because that's a really important thing. We don't want our torque converter bolts rattling loose or getting loose at all. I always tell my guys, use Loctite on any bolt or nut that you are concerned may loosen up. Most of the time, kind of funny, but most of the time if they come up and ask me, hey, what do you think? Should I Loctite this? I'm like, you know what? If you got to ask me, yes, just do it. Just Loctite it. So don't go wild and Loctite every single bolt you touch, but if you're concerned about something, go ahead and Loctite it. Another tip here is try to keep your bolts in their original location, or at least group bolts together by length and by size. So what I mean by that is you take a part off a vehicle, you got a handful of bolts. You don't necessarily need to have every bolt go back exactly where it came from, but what I like to do is pay attention to the length of the bolts. Say you got one example that I use a lot is a valve body in a transmission. I drop a valve body, I probably got 20 bolts there. 15 of them are the same length. 5 of them are a little bit longer. I got to be really careful that I use the right bolts in the right spots, because if I put a bolt that's actually too long and ram it in there, that bolt's going to go through the valve body and it could hit the transmission case and it could cause problems. So one trick I always use is I get all the bolts started by just a thread or two and look at how much bolt is actually hanging out of the hole. You want them all to be consistent because you want the bolts to all have about the same amount of threads before they get tight. Okay, here's just a diagram of the bolt sizes and thread pitch. So yeah, just a quick example for you here. So looking at this over here, this is standard 1/2 inch bolt by 13. So 1/2 inch by 13, the 1/2 inch refers to the shank thickness, the 13 refers to the thread pitch. Okay, let's look at the metric. This is probably the most common metric over here. Here's a real common bolt, 10 by 1.25. That means bolt diameter 10 millimeters. So the 10 millimeters refers to the diameter, and the 1.25 refers to the thread pitch. Okay, so now let's talk about tightening these bolts. Torquing is used to tighten a fastener to a predetermined tightness. So this is accomplished using a torque wrench. Most torque wrenches you're going to use are a clicker type. So as you're tightening a bolt, they're going to have a little bit of a give to them. When it gets tight, and it's going to click, and you'll feel it and you'll hear it. So there are some fasteners that you guys will always need to torque. I'm not telling you to torque every single fastener you touch, but there are some fasteners that no matter what we have to torque. So cylinder heads, intake manifolds, spindle nuts, axle nuts, lug nuts, these are fasteners that no matter what, we got to be torquing. So there are a lot of fasteners, guys, that over time you're going to get used to how tight they are. You're going to get a feel for how tight they need to be. If you're not confident, if you're just unsure a little bit, just look up a torque spec or ask for help. Ask an experienced tech to check it for you, because you don't want to come back. So if you're not sure, just double check. Okay, and this finally, you guys are going to break bolts and you are going to strip out threads. It's going to happen and it sucks, but you know what? Don't freak out. Don't get pissed off and all frustrated. Just fix it. Okay, there's ways to fix it. It's not the end of the world. Okay, stretch bolts. These are bolts that are designed to stretch while being torqued to maintain a consistent pressure on the item being tightened down. They actually stretch while you tighten them. So we're going to see these used on cylinder heads or head bolts. You cannot reuse these bolts. They have to be replaced every time we use them. So most cylinder head torque specs will require an initial torque and then a certain degree of rotation, and we're going to need what's called a degree wheel to accomplish this. That's this right here. So for example, you're tightening a cylinder head, it says tighten the head bolt to 90 foot-pounds and then an additional 180 degrees. So you tighten it to 90 till it clicks. Now you grab your degree wheel, hook it up, and you're going to spin that thing an additional 90 degrees. That's how it wants it to be done. So torque sequence or tightening patterns. So in your procedure that you're looking up the repair, you're going to find a sequence telling you in which order the bolts should be torqued. Guess what, guys? This is super easy because they're all the same. Start in the middle and work your way out on every single one. Always use a crisscross pattern when tightening anything. So it's always going to be the same. We're going to start in the middle and we're going to work our way to the edges. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The reason being is because we don't want to tighten one end and work our way to the other end, because we can cause different funny things. We can cause that head to warp or that part to warp or the gasket to get crushed funny. So we always start in the center and work our way out, doing a crisscross pattern while doing it. Okay, so some of the chemicals you guys are going to use here. We use silicone in place of some gaskets. So some oil pans, some transmission pans, they're going to have silicone seal. So I like to get this stuff here. I put it in an actual caulk gun, and I like to use a really high quality, or expensive silicone, really high oil resistant silicone when I'm doing stuff like oil pan or anything, any oil seal. So typically, guys, when we get gaskets, typically for the most part, they're always installed dry. So the only gaskets that we don't install dry, we actually coat with a sealant first, are gaskets that we use for the cooling system. So gaskets or O-rings, and then for those we like to use this right here, which is an anaerobic gasket maker, an anaerobic sealant, which means anaerobic basically means that it never fully dries. It's really sticky stuff. I found that it works really good for all the coolant related seals. Brake cleaner, you're going to use a ton of that. We use that to degrease and clean almost everything. And mass airflow cleaner, specially designed for cleaning mass airflow sensors because it does not leave any residue behind when it dries. Okay, so let's talk about separating a ball joint or a tie rod end. So the best way to separate a ball joint or a tie rod end without damaging it is smack the area of metal surrounding the tapered shaft firmly with a hammer. So right here, we're going to take a hammer. Of course, you're going to take your nut off first. You're going to take a hammer, smack it right there. You might have to smack it a few times. You might have to smack it pretty hard, but it's going to pop that tapered shaft loose. It's going to pop it loose. That way we haven't damaged anything. Because the other way to separate that joint, we're using this right here called a pickle fork. And that's, you're going to actually drive it in right there and hammer it until it pops apart, but we're ruining the joint at that point. So unless you're replacing a joint that you don't care about, we never want to use those. Okay, CV axle replacement. So these CV axles, they are held in place with a retaining clip or a circlip. You can see right here. So as you put it into the transmission, it kind of snaps in place. So when you're replacing the CV axle, you have to use some force to get this popped back out of place. So what I like to do is get a pry bar. If you can find a good spot to pry between the transmission case and the axle, try to pry it. Sometimes just with a little pry it can pop loose. Sometimes I use a pry bar and have somebody smack it right here with a hammer, just enough to jar it to come loose. So alignment after repairs. Okay guys, so whenever the steering system components have been replaced, an alignment's got to be done. Example, tie rod ends, or if a vehicle's subframe has been removed, it's going to need an alignment. Usually, when we replace a ball joint or wheel bearing, it does not require an alignment. It hasn't affected anything with the alignment, so there are some repairs that don't affect alignment whatsoever. Your shop may or may not offer alignments. Some shops just they farm it out or they sublet it. I do have a bonus video on performing alignments. If your shop does do alignments, it is a good thing to know. Okay, another thing is replacing catalytic converters. Now here is something that a lot of techs don't know. They throw a catalytic converter on, replace it, and they go test drive it. Well, you're actually going to be really shortening the lifespan of this catalytic converter if you don't break it in properly. So there is a special break-in procedure. Yeah, guys, just FYI, I actually replaced lots of cats before I even knew about this break-in procedure, so whoops. But since then, I've used it every time. So again, this is the only way to get full life expectancy out of your replacement catalytic converter. Here we go, here's the procedure. So after replacing the cat, start the engine, let it idle for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, you're going to hop in the vehicle, hold the RPMs at 2,500 for 2 minutes. After that, shut off the vehicle and allow it to cool down for a while. So why we're doing this, what's happening is actually allows the matting, which is this stuff right here, you can see that it's like a fiber matting right there. It's actually allowing the matting around the element to expand and secure the element inside the converter shell. There's like a glue in here or something, so we have to get it hot enough that it releases and it melts and allows this matting to expand, and then it really just locks these, it says substrate, it locks the platinum elements in place so they're not going to shift around or move or leak. We don't want exhaust to leak around them either. All right, so after the vehicle is repaired, we have to test drive the vehicle. Very important. Always, always, always test drive the vehicle after making a repair. You know, unless it's something totally unrelated to driving, example, a radio or a dome lights or a brake light. I mean, unless it's something really obvious that it's not, nothing else is going to be affected, we always test drive vehicles. So make sure to always test their parts you have replaced. An example, if you worked on the four-wheel drive system, pop the thing in four-wheel drive and drive it around. Make sure everything's working correctly. Brakes, if you did brake work, make sure you really pay attention to how those brakes feel and sound. AC, air conditioning, of course, you did AC service. Go drive it, crank the AC, make sure it works good. Okay? So if something does go wrong, we definitely want it to happen to us and not the customer, right? And it's, believe me guys, it's happened. You drive it around and all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, we got a caliper locked up, you know, something like that. We limp it back to the shop and take care of it before we give it to the customer, right? Because we do not want the customer taking this vehicle and then bringing it back 15 minutes later, even a day later with a problem, because now we look like idiots. So, okay, so post checks. Post checks are something we do at our shop every time we work on a vehicle. We have another set of eyes look at it to post check the work, to make sure all the fasteners are tight, to make sure everything looks good. But we post check anything that could leak after the test drive. Okay, so if we did a transmission replacement, if we replaced engine oil cooler lines or radiator hose, we drive it first before post checking it because we want to double check that that system's not going to leak, which is what we're just talked about. Always have somebody else post check your work. Guys, it's going to save you. It is going to save you. I promise you it's going to save you at least once. You get done with your job, even if your shop's not real prone on that, be like, hey, you want to take a look at my repairs? They might look at you funny the first time, but you guys, this is the best way to do it. Have somebody else look at your work. Okay, so guys, always pay attention to safety related items when you're working on them, okay? repairs that involve steering or suspension work. I mean, just keep it in the back of your head. Now, remember, people are depending on us, right, to keep them safe. They're depending on you to keep them safe. So guys, just don't be careless, I guess is what I'm saying. Just pay attention. And the whole time you're working on it, just remember to yourself, I got to make sure I do this properly, because suspension, steering, brake work, that stuff is all safety related, right? So we don't want to screw it up. People are depending on us. So a quick story about that I'll never forget. And this is actually when I was working at a motorcycle shop. One morning we came into work like normal, and the boss says, or the service manager, the boss, he says, "All right, everybody, we need a quick meeting. You guys gather around." So we gather around. He walks back into the office. He comes back out, and I could tell he was pissed off about something. He comes back out, and he takes a motorcycle fender that has been mangled to crap, and he throws it on the ground in front of us. And the poor guy who worked on it, we all know who worked on that bike and what had happened. And he was ticked off because the customer came back to him. What happened? They went on a bike trip, and there's 4 bolts holding the front fender of the motorcycle fender on. Well, the tech put the bolts on finger tight, never tightened them. The fender actually fell on top of the tire, wrapped around the tire, and got stuck underneath the tire. And the motorcycle rider somehow kept it from going down. He skidded that thing to a stop, and so that thing was throwing sparks. The thing just looked like crap. So I'll never forget that, because it was just a miracle that guy didn't crash. That could have been really, really, really bad. So I'll never forget that. Something that I always think about as I'm working on somebody's vehicle. Your phone rings, something like that. It's like, remember, what you're doing is the most important thing. It comes before everything. Answering your phone, that type of stuff. Keep track of what you're doing. Another little quick tip is, if I do have to walk away from something, say I'm in the middle of, I don't know, you name it, putting somebody's brakes together. One of the tricks I've used is that if I do have to walk away, I'm going to take my socket and stick it on the bolt. So I walk away, come back, and I'm going to see that. I'm going to be like, or where did I put that socket? Or I'm going to see that and be like, oh, yeah, that's right. I have to finish tightening these. Okay. So you're going to learn your own habits over time, but always pay attention. Here's something else, you guys, and this is really important to me. If something breaks, or if it's not quite right, guys, just go tell or show the service writer. Believe me, it is way better to be upfront about this than to try and hide stuff. And you know what? Stuff's going to happen. Stuff's going to break, and you're going to screw stuff up, and it's going to be your fault. Stuff happens. Take responsibility, guys. Believe me, you're going to feel better about it if you just take responsibility. Go get the service writer. I mean, even as stupid as we've had it in my shop, we're hoisting a vehicle, and somehow or another, the mirror got snapped off. Okay, I don't know how. You know what? Okay, shoot, that sucks. We're going to get the guy a new mirror. Just take responsibility for it. If you try to hide stuff, it's going to come back to you, and you're going to feel miserable. So just be upfront about it. The service writer, service manager, they might be upset at the time. They might be angry. But believe me, I've been in that shoe. Believe me, they're going to respect you more for it later on. They're going to respect you more for just coming and telling them about it and not trying to hide it from them. Now, that being said, I got one other point to touch on about that, and that's this. You guys, don't be afraid to stick up for yourself, especially if you're not to blame for something, or if something out of your control happens. So when something goes wrong, guys, don't be afraid to stick up for yourself. And one other thing about that is, do not ever let an employer take money from you for something gone wrong, okay? So my theory on that is, I actually worked at a place one time. I worked at a tire shop, and the guy's changing tires. We're not making any money. We're changing tires and oil. The guy I'm working with, he's changing tires. He's got some, stupid aftermarket expensive wheels for somebody. He's changing tires on. He leans the tires up against the side of a wall. One of the tires falls over on its face on this chrome rim, and it scratches it up. total accident, right? Well, later I find out that the service manager's actually taken money out of this guy's paycheck to pay for this rim, to pay for this wheel. And I said, what? I'm like, you let him do that? He's like, yeah, what am I going to do? That just made me really mad. And I've always thought about that I'm never going to do that to my guys. My theory about that is this. If you're, as the tech, are taking all the responsibility or all the risk, you should also be getting all the reward, okay? So if you're taking all the risk, you should be getting 100% of that profit. So I know as a shop owner that I'm taking some risk. Every day I'm open, that stuff's going to get wrecked, stuff's going to get broke, and I feel like when that happens, you just need to suck it up. I am the shop, profiting from the majority of the repair, so therefore I am got to be responsible for when stuff goes wrong. So just remember that, guys, as you go forth. All right, and a couple other last things. Just keep these tucked away in your head, right? Another thing is, remember, don't get overwhelmed by a big job. You're going to get some huge jobs, and it's going to look like Mission Impossible to you. Don't get overwhelmed by it, guys. And what I've always done is just take a breath and remind yourself, it's only nuts and bolts, okay? Because good thing is, we are not brain surgeons. We don't have somebody's life depending on laying in our hands. It's only nuts and bolts, right? You start thinking about it like that, yeah, it's only nuts and bolts. We can take care of it. We can handle it. So one last thing that I want you guys to be successful. And one thing that in my schooling I had one of my instructors say to me, and it's just stuck with me. It's stuck with me that my whole life is that he said in one of his classes, he said, guys, I want to make sure you remember this. Take care of yourself. And how he said it is, you got to take care of numero uno. And he said, now I'm not telling you to go out there and be jerks to everybody. But he said, remember, you have to take care of yourself. And when there's chances out there and when there's opportunities, you guys, I personally have a tendency to always be the nice guy, okay? And sometimes you can actually suffer for that. So that's always stuck with me, guys. You got to take care of yourself, and just always remember that. Don't be jerks to everybody, but make sure to take care of yourself. You got to put yourself first, okay? Because we want you to be successful. And finally, the last thing, guys, have fun with it. Have fun with this. Okay? If you get in the field, if you get a job, have fun. And remind yourself, you're doing what you set out to do. You're doing what you want to do. Guys, every day I go to work, some days better than others, but I always think it's like, I don't know what else I'd do because I enjoy this. And I just enjoy everything about it. And I enjoy learning about it. And I enjoy making the repairs. And guess what? I enjoy teaching it too, which is why I'm here. So have fun with it, guys. And we are done. That is the end of Module 12. I still want you to watch all my bonuses, but we made it easy. So good work, everybody. And thanks for sticking with me. And again, keep up to date and let me know how things are going for you. If you have any questions, post them, but also let me know how things are treating you if you get a job, or if you decide to do some side work on your own. I'd sure like to hear about it. So it's been great teaching you guys, and I hope to be talking to you again. See ya.